He grabbed my hand and said, "Your wife's pie built my empire." Then he dropped it like I was trash, but that wasn't the worst part. My grandson looked up at me and asked, "Did Grandma give him the recipe?" Like maybe I was the liar. Like 37 years with Margaret could be erased by a smirk and a menu. I nearly broke right there. But Rick didn't know what Margaret mailed to herself, what I was about to find. He stole her pie. Now I was going to take back everything. My name is Walter McKenna, and I'm 75 years old. Every Saturday I drive my grandson Tommy into town for lunch, clinging to the routines that kept me going after my wife Margaret passed. Our old family cookbook sits locked in my desk drawer. Margaret's recipes written in her delicate hand, especially that award-winning pie recipe she guarded so carefully. "These pages are our family's soul," she told me, methodically mailing copies to herself for safekeeping. My chest tightens whenever I pass Rick Jameson's gleaming new restaurant, its windows plastered with awards won using stolen secrets. He doesn't know about Margaret's documented proof, carefully postmarked and preserved. The afternoon sun catches the chrome trim of his establishment as Tommy and I pull into the parking lot, the air thick with familiar spices that should belong to us. But let me start from the beginning. The bell chimed as Tommy and I stepped into Jameson's. The place was packed shoulder to shoulder, every table filled with folks diving into their plates like they were discovering food for the first time. Tommy squeezed my hand, something he hadn't done since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. "Look at all the awards, Grandpa." He pointed at the wall, which looked like a trophy store had exploded across it. Gold, medals, blue ribbons, and enough certificates to wallpaper my garage, each one screaming about some innovative recipe that was changing the face of comfort food. But it was the display case that stopped me cold. Right there in the center, bathed in what looked like heaven's own spotlight, sat a golden-crusted pie with that distinctive lattice top. Margaret's signature weave, the one she'd spent 30 years perfecting. You know how sometimes a sight can punch you right in the gut? That was one of those moments. "Walter McKenna," a voice boomed across the restaurant. Rick Jameson himself came striding over, all teeth and tailored shirt, that flashy watch of his catching the light. He grabbed my hand in both of his, squeezing just hard enough to make his point. "What brings you to my humble establishment?" Before I could answer, he leaned in close, too close, and dropped his voice to, barely above a whisper, "Your late wife's pie built my empire." He released my fingers like he was dropping something dirty, that practiced smile never wavering. Tommy tugged at my sleeve, his eyes darting between us, looking for answers, I suppose, or maybe just trying to figure out why his grandpa had gone stiff as a fence post. My stomach was doing somersaults, but I managed what I hoped was a steady smile for the boys' sake. "Let's find a seat sport," I said, guiding him toward an empty booth near the window. The vinyl squeaked under us as we settled in, and I picked up a menu more to hide behind than to read. But there it was, right on the first page, "World-famous Jameson pie, a family secret." The words might as well have been written in Margaret's blood. The usual restaurant buzz seemed to fade into something darker, like every murmured conversation was about us. Or maybe that was just my mind playing tricks. You ever notice how shame can make a crowded room feel empty and suffocating all at once? I glanced around at the newspaper clippings framed on the walls. "Local chef revolutionizes classic dessert. Jameson's secret recipe captures hearts. Innovation meets tradition." Each headline twisted in my chest like a knife. Margaret had spent decades building those flavors, testing combinations, adjusting temperatures degree by degree. And here was this thief being celebrated as some kind of culinary genius. When the waitress came by, I ordered coffee for myself and a chocolate milk for Tommy. Keep it simple, I thought. Get through this meal without ruining my grandson's day. But I knew I couldn't leave without saying something. Margaret deserved that much. We sat there while Tommy chatted about his latest baseball game, my responses, running on autopilot, while I watched Rick work the room. He stopped at every table, shaking hands, accepting compliments with that false modesty that makes your teeth ache. Finally, when he passed near our booth, I caught his eye. "Mind if I ask you something, Rick?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. He turned with that television-ready smile of his. "For you, Walter, anything. That crust recipe of yours, who taught you how to make it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I could feel eyes turning our way, folks settling in for what they probably thought would be some friendly shop talk between a successful restaurateur and a curious old-timer. Rick's smile widened, if that was possible. He glanced around at his audience, then back at me. Now, Walter, a chef never reveals his secrets, but let's just say, some recipes find their way to those who know what to do with them. That smirk of his was an invitation to push further, to make a scene. He wanted me to blow up, to look like some confused old man causing trouble in his precious restaurant. That smirk told me everything I needed to know. I laid a 20 on the table and walked Tommy up to the register, my mind churning like an old washing machine. Some battles you pick your moment for, and some pick it for you. "Mr. Jameson," I said, keeping my voice level as he rang us up. "We need to clear something up. That pie recipe you're using, it's my wife Margaret's. She never licensed it, never sold it, and she certainly never gave it away. Not to anyone." The dining room got quiet enough to hear a fork drop. Rick tilted his head, looking at me with what I suppose he thought was patience, like I was some doddering old fool who'd wandered in off the street. "Walter," he said, drawing out my name like warm taffy. "Margaret gave me that recipe herself. We were friends." He waved his hand at the packed tables behind us. "All these people can't be wrong about a Jameson family tradition, can they?" My heart nearly stopped when I heard Tommy's small voice beside me. "Did Grandma share it? You know that feeling when the ground starts shifting under your feet? When something you've known as solid truth your whole life suddenly feels like quicksand?" That's what hit me right then. 37 years of marriage, and here was this smooth-talking stranger making me question whether I really knew my own wife's mind. I squared my shoulders, trying to keep my voice steady. "Show me the proof, Rick. If she gave it to you, you must have something to back that up." He leaned in close enough I could smell his expensive aftershave. "Go ahead, prove it," he purred, like a cat playing with its dinner. Then he straightened up, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "I've got documents on file, Walter, and plenty of witnesses who'll tell you this pie has always been Jameson's." The trap was laid out plain as day. If I made a scene here, I'd look like a bitter old man trying to steal someone else's success. If I stayed quiet, I'd look beaten. Either way, Rick won. I could feel Tommy's eyes on me, waiting to see what his grandpa would do. The credit card slip sat there on the counter between us, waiting for my signature. My hand didn't shake as I picked up the pen. I'll give myself that much credit. "Come on, sport," I said to Tommy, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Some answers live in drawers, not dining rooms." Rick's reflection caught my eye in one of those chrome napkin holders as we turned to leave. That smirk of his followed us all the way to the door, like a shadow you can't shake. The bell above the door jingled as we stepped out into the afternoon sun. I paused there on the threshold, my mind spinning with possibilities. What documents could he possibly have? Margaret had been meticulous about her recipes, treating them like family heirlooms. The thought of her giving one away, especially that pie recipe, it just didn't add up. Tommy's hand slipped into mine as we stood there, and I gave it a gentle squeeze. Rick's words about those supposed documents echoed in my head, each repetition adding another crack to my certainty. The drive home felt longer than usual. Tommy kept quiet in the passenger seat, and I couldn't blame him. What do you say when your grandfather's just been called a liar in front of a restaurant full of people? The sun was starting to lean west when we pulled into the driveway. I could still smell traces of Margaret's flower garden. She'd planted those perennials to mark the seasons, and here they were doing their job without her. Funny how some things keep their promises even after you're gone. "Got homework?" I asked Tommy as we stepped inside. He nodded, already pulling out his math book. "Just fractions." "Kitchen counter's all yours," I said, trying to sound normal. But my mind was already upstairs, locked away in Margaret's desk drawer. You ever notice how a room feels different when you're searching for something that might break your heart? I stood there in our study, Margaret's study really, and my hands weren't quite steady as I turned the key in that old oak desk. The drawer slid open with a familiar whisper. The folders were right where they'd always been, organized Margaret's way. Holidays, crust, spices. I gathered them all, along with a stack of loose papers that had settled at the back. Walking down to spread them across the dining room table felt like carrying dynamite. Margaret's handwriting flowed across every page, neat and precise. I started with holidays, scanning each sheet for any mention of Rick Jameson, any hint of a transfer, any dotted line with a signature. Nothing but recipes and notes about which grandkid liked what at Thanksgiving. The crust folder came next. My eyes traced every loop and curve of Margaret's writing, hunting for legal language, searching for anything that might explain Rick's claim. Just techniques and temperatures, ratios and reminders. Spices held the same story. Detailed instructions, but no signatures, no transfers, no mentions of Rick Jameson. Old letters slipped from between the pages, mostly from her sister about family gatherings. Margaret's Bible sat there too, pressed recipe notes tucked between its pages like autumn leaves. Harold Benton's name kept floating up in my mind. He'd known Margaret almost as long as I had, been over for dinner more times than I could count. If anyone might remember something I'd missed. But no, I needed to finish this search first. Had to know exactly what I was dealing with before I started asking for help. "Grandpa?" Tommy's voice carried from the kitchen. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure thing, sport." I kept my voice steady, though my eyes were starting to burn from all the reading. "Do you think—" He paused, and I heard his pencil tap against the counter. "Do you think sometimes people give away secrets for the greater good? Like, so more people can enjoy them?" The heat behind my eyes got worse. I had to swallow hard before I could answer. "Your grandmother believed family recipes were like family stories," I said carefully. "They're precious, because they're ours. They're how we remember who we are." He went quiet after that, just the soft scratch of pencil on paper floating through the house. I flipped the last folder closed and sat back, staring at the empty space where proof should have been. Nothing. Not a single scrap of paper to counter whatever document Rick claimed to have. The clock on the wall ticked away, each sound like a hammer falling. Papers could be forged, signatures copied, stories twisted until they wore different faces. My fingers found Margaret's keyring, still warm from being clutched too tight. That's when my phone vibrated once in my pocket, like it knew I was thinking about making that call to Harold. One person left who might remember some detail, some breadcrumb I'd overlooked. I looked at all those scattered papers, Margaret's careful handwriting swimming before my eyes. Each recipe was a memory. Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, celebrations that had built our family's story one dish at a time. And now some stranger was trying to rewrite that story, page by stolen page. I've always been an early riser. Margaret used to tease me about it, said my internal clock was wound too tight. That morning, though, being up before dawn felt less like habit and more like reconnaissance. You know that stillness just before a town wakes up? When the streetlights are still on but getting paler by the minute? That's when I eased my truck onto Main Street, heading toward Rick Jameson's restaurant. Had to see what I was up against. The sky was barely warming to grey when I pulled into the lot across from his place. Steam already curled from the kitchen vents, and the lights inside blazed like a victory bonfire. Two of his workers hustled through the back door, carrying produce boxes. Everything looked so official, professional, like it had always been his. I clicked on the radio, thinking some background noise might steady my nerves. Big mistake. Craving comfort? Missing Mum's home cooking? The announcer's voice oozed through my speakers. Come experience the world-famous Jameson pie, a family secret, winner of 3 regional baking awards. My knuckles went white on the steering wheel. I switched stations, but the ad followed me. There too, Rick had bought up every morning slot in town. By 7:30 I had to pick up Tommy for school. When I circled back past the restaurant, the line already stretched around the block. Cars filled every parking space, and people stood shoulder to shoulder on the sidewalk, chatting like they were waiting for a parade. Through the front windows, I caught the unmistakable flash of TV cameras, a morning news crew getting their B-roll, footage of Rick's empire. "Grandpa?" Tommy's voice pulled my eyes from the scene. "Can I ask you something?" "Course you can, buddy." I tried to keep my voice light, but my throat felt tight. "What if—" He fiddled with his backpack strap. "What if Grandma wanted people to enjoy it? The pie, I mean. Like, what if she'd be happy that so many people get to taste it now?" The question hit me like a physical blow. You ever have the ground just shift under you? Like everything you thought was solid suddenly isn't. I'd spent 30 years guarding those recipes. Margaret had trusted me with them, made me promise. "They're our family's soul," she'd said. But looking at Tommy's earnest face in the passenger seat, I realized I was risking something bigger than recipes. His faith in me, in her, was hanging by a thread. I had to clear my throat. That's a good question, Sport. How about we talk about it after school? Really give it the attention it deserves. He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. The same doubt that was starting to gnaw at my own certainty. After dropping him off, I drove home slow, that radio jingle playing on repeat in my head. Rick Jameson's voice was everywhere now, on the air, in the papers, probably soon on TV. He wasn't just stealing Margaret's recipe, he was erasing her completely, replacing her memory with his brand, his story, his legacy, and he was doing it faster than grief ever had. I parked in our driveway and just sat there, staring at the house. Through the study window, I could see Margaret's desk, silent, waiting. But going through those papers alone again wouldn't help. I was losing this battle, and worse, I was losing Tommy's trust in the process. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I pulled it out, scrolled to Harold Benton's number. Harold, who'd been there for every holiday dinner, who'd watched Margaret perfect that crust over decades. Who might remember something, anything, that could help me fight back? My thumb hovered over the call button. That damn jingle kept looping in my head. World-famous Jameson pie, a family secret. Family secret. Right, but whose family? Ever notice how pride can keep you from making a simple phone call? I sat in my driveway for another 10 minutes, wrestling with myself before finally punching Harold's number. 3 rings, then his familiar gravel voice came through. Walt, been wondering when you'd call. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. You heard about Rick's place. Hard not to. Those radio ads are giving me heartburn. Harold's tone shifted. How are you holding up? Not great. I leaned back in the seat, watching a cardinal hop along my fence. Took Tommy there yesterday. Rick cornered us, pretty much bragged about stealing Margaret's recipe. Claims he's got documents proving she gave it to him. Documents? Harold snorted. That's rich. Yeah, well, the whole town's eating it up. Literally. There was a news crew there this morning, Harold, and Tommy My voice caught. He's starting to wonder if maybe his grandmother wanted to share it, like I'm the bad guy for questioning Rick's story. You check Margaret's papers? Spent half the night going through everything. Letters, recipe cards, her Bible. Nothing that proves anything either way. But Rick's got something cooked up. I can feel it. He's too confident. Harold went quiet for a moment. Just when I thought the connection had dropped, he asked, Did Margaret ever mail the recipe to herself? The question hit me like a thunderbolt. A Saturday morning, years ago, flashed through my mind. Margaret at the kitchen table, carefully folding a piece of paper marked Crust Final into a manila envelope. Her eyes twinkling as she sealed it. For the stubborn ones, she'd said, winking at me before heading to the post office. Walt, you there? Yeah, I straightened up in my seat. Yeah, she did. But that was, 15 years ago. Common practice back then, Harold explained. Poor man's copyright. Date stamp proves when something was written. Post office keeps records of certified mail for decades. The fog that had been pressing down on me since yesterday started to lift. You think they still have it? Worth checking. Might be your smoking gun if Rick's claiming he got the recipe recently. I was already grabbing my keys. Harold, I could kiss you. His laugh rumbled through the phone. Save it for when we actually find the thing. After hanging up, I shot Tommy a quick text. Dinner might be late tonight, bud. Making it up to you with chocolate chip pancakes. Then I headed straight for the post office. The place hadn't changed much since Margaret's days. Same faded blue carpet, same fluorescent buzz overhead. A young clerk named Jenny listened to my request, her forehead crinkling. Archives that old would be off-site, Mr. McKenna. We'll need to submit a formal records request. She pulled out a thick form. There's a processing fee, and it usually takes whatever it costs, I said, already reaching for my wallet. Just tell me what you need. 10 minutes and $40 later, I had a reference number and instructions to follow up in 3 business days. Jenny smiled apologetically. I wish I could speed it up, but procedures are procedures. No, this is good, I assured her, carefully tucking the receipt into my wallet. This is more than I had an hour ago. You know that feeling when you finally grab hold of something solid after treading water? That's how I felt walking out into the afternoon heat. The sun was high and harsh, But for the first time since yesterday, I didn't mind it much. I slid behind the wheel and pulled out my phone, Harold's number ready for an update. Through my windshield, I could see the post office's American flag snapping in the breeze, its shadow drawing a straight line across the parking lot. Like an arrow, like a path. I pulled into my driveway around 3, hoping to catch my breath before Tommy got home from school. That's when I noticed the newspaper poking out of my mailbox, one of those glossy weekend inserts I usually toss straight in the recycling. But there it was, right on the cover, Rick Jameson in his pristine chef's coat, standing next to what he called Jameson's signature lattice. My stomach turned at how perfectly he'd copied Margaret's trademark weave. You ever notice how once something gets under your skin, it seems to pop up everywhere? Well, that's what happened next. I made the mistake of checking my phone while I waited for the coffee to brew. My neighbor's daughter had shared some photos from Rick's place. Seemed like half the cast of that medical show that films. Downtown had stopped in for pie. There they were, grinning with their forks raised, while Rick stood behind them looking like he'd invented dessert itself. I took screenshots. Might seem petty, but something told me to document everything. The way Rick was spreading his version of the story, I figured having a record couldn't hurt. Then, driving to pick up some groceries, I saw it. A fresh banner stretched across Main Street, red letters, declaring home of the world-famous pie. I pulled over and snapped a photo of that too. Margaret would have hated all this fuss. She believed good food spoke for itself, no billboards needed. The phone rang just as I was putting away the milk. It was Jenny from the post office. "Mr. McKenna, about that archives request," she paused. "I should have mentioned earlier. We only access off-site storage on scheduled retrieval days. The next window is 2 weeks out." My hand tightened on the receiver. 2 weeks? I'm sorry, it's policy. We can put you first on the list for the 15th? I wrote it down while she talked, big block letters on a yellow sticky note. 14 days. Slapped it right on the fridge where I couldn't miss it. After hanging up, I stood there staring at those numbers until they started to blur. 2 weeks. Plenty of time for Rick to shore up whatever story he was building. But maybe, just maybe, enough time for me to build something too. I grabbed a legal pad from Margaret's desk and started mapping it out. First step, prove the handwriting was hers. Easy enough. Frank Webster, our family attorney, had handled Margaret's will. He'd seen enough of her signature to testify if needed. I dialed his office right then and booked an appointment for Thursday. Next, we'd need someone to tell the story right. Sarah Chen at the Gazette came to mind. She'd done a beautiful piece when Margaret passed, took the time to really understand who my wife was, found her number in my contacts, and left a message asking to meet. The rest would depend on what we found in that envelope. But I could picture it already. A quiet reveal, nothing dramatic, just facts laid out clean and clear, letting the truth speak for itself, the way Margaret would have wanted it. I was still at the kitchen, table when I heard Tommy's key in the front door. We needed to have a talk, a real one this time. No more dancing around what was happening. He deserved to understand why his grandfather was digging through old papers instead of letting things be. The lock clicked and I straightened in my chair. Sometimes the hardest conversations are the most important ones. I'd learned that from Margaret too. The door handle turned and I took a deep breath. Time to tell my grandson about honor, about promises, and about why some things are worth fighting for. Tommy dropped his backpack by the door, and the smell of melting butter pulled him straight to the kitchen. I'd promised him pancakes, and if there's one thing Margaret taught me, it's that tough conversations go better with comfort food. "Breakfast for dinner?" His eyes lit up as I flipped another golden circle onto the growing stack. "Thought we could use something special tonight," I said, sliding the plate his way. "Got some things we need to talk about. You know that moment when you're about to dive into something important, when the words are all lined up in your head, but you're not sure how they'll sound once they're out? That's where I was watching my grandson drizzle maple syrup in careful circles. "It's about Rick Jameson's pie, isn't it?" Tommy asked between bites. Smart kid, always has been. I pulled Margaret's cookbook from the drawer where I'd left it and sat down across from him. "Remember how I told you Grandma was careful about her recipes?" He nodded. Fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Take a look at this." I opened to the page with her lattice design. The careful pencil marks showed every cross and weave. "Now look at this." I pulled out the newspaper insert with Rick's pie. Tommy leaned in, eyes moving, between the two. They're exactly the same. Down to the last twist, I agreed. Your grandmother developed that pattern herself. Took her 3 years to get it just right. But why didn't she stop him before? He trailed off, and I saw him wrestling with the timeline. She never knew, Bud. This all started after she passed. I kept my voice steady. But we might have a way to prove it. Remember how Grandma used to mail important things to herself? His face brightened with recognition. Like when she sent herself that story I wrote in 2nd grade. Exactly like that. We're checking the post office archives now. 2 weeks until we can look. Just then, my phone buzzed. Sarah Chen from the Gazette, returning my call from earlier. Mr. McKenna, she said when I answered, I remember your wife's pies well. If you find concrete evidence about the recipe, I'd be very interested in following up. Appreciate that, Sarah. Give me 2 weeks. I'll keep an eye out, she promised. The next morning I met Harold at our usual coffee spot. He was already there, 2 steaming cups waiting. Got the retrieval request right here, I said, sliding the paper across the table. But we need backup plans, Harold. What if the envelope isn't there? He took a thoughtful sip. Then we gather everything else we can. Photos, testimonials, church bulletins, anything that shows Margaret's pie history. Build the context while we wait. That's exactly what I did over the next week. Dug through photo albums of Margaret at church bake sales, found old holiday cards where she'd tucked in recipe notes, even discovered a yellowed fundraiser flyer advertising her famous lattice-top pie. Every morning, I'd replace the sticky note above the stove with a new countdown. 13 days became 12, then 11. Each number felt like a promise. Tommy asked questions every night at dinner. Good ones, tough ones. What if he really did know Grandma? What happens if we find the envelope? What if we don't? I answered each one straight. No venom in my voice. This isn't about being angry, I told him. It's about protecting what's true. Your grandmother believed in doing things right. That last night before the retrieval window, sleep wouldn't come. I lay there listening to the clock tick, thinking about Margaret, about how she'd spend hours getting that lattice just so, never rushing, never cutting corners. We'll set it right, I whispered into the dark. I promise. The clock kept ticking, marking time until morning, when we'd finally see if that envelope was waiting in the archives. Whatever we found, or didn't find, I knew one thing for certain. Margaret's legacy deserved this fight. The call came at 8:15 sharp, just as the post office opened. Mr. McKenna, your archive request is ready for viewing. I grabbed my coat and Margaret's cookbook, then picked up Harold on my way. He didn't say much during the drive, just held onto the dashboard as I might have taken those corners a touch faster than usual. You ever notice how some buildings seem to hold their breath? That's how the records facility felt when we walked in. All concrete and fluorescent lights, with that peculiar paper dust smell that comes from storing decades of mail. Sign here, please. The clerk pushed a ledger across the counter. My hand shook a bit as I wrote my name. Not from age, mind you, but from knowing what might be in those archives. Give them a minute to bring it up, Harold said, settling into one of those hard plastic chairs they keep in government buildings. I paced instead, Margaret's cookbook tucked under my arm like a shield. Through a set of double doors, I could see a clerk rolling out a large grey bin. Looked like hundreds of sealed envelopes in there, all tagged and sorted. Careful now, Harold murmured as the bin came our way. Let them do their job. The clerk started reading labels, methodical as a church reading. Each name that wasn't Margaret's felt like a small punch to the gut. Then, Margaret McKenna, 1247 Maple Street. My breath caught hard in my throat. The date stamp matched that Saturday I remembered, the one when she joked about being stubborn. Sir, the clerk held up the envelope. We'll need a supervisor to witness the opening. I nodded, not trusting my voice just then. Harold's hand found my shoulder while we waited. The supervisor arrived with a camera and forms. Chain of custody procedure, she explained, positioning the envelope under bright light. We'll photograph the seal and postmark first. My fingers itched to grab that envelope, but I forced myself still. Watch them work. Do it right. The camera clicked 3 times. You may open it now, Mr. McKenna. The paper was soft with age, but the seal held firm. I slid my thumb under the flap, feeling decades of waiting tear-free. Inside, a single folded page. Crust. Final, I read aloud. And there it was, Margaret's handwriting, clear as Sunday morning. Every loop and cross exactly as I remembered. The lattice diagram in the corner, with her precise notes about crossing points and edge crimping. "We'd like certified copies," Harold said, practical as always. "And a sleeve for the original." The supervisor nodded. "We can do that right now." While they worked the copier, I held that page like it was spun gold. Every measurement, every temperature note, every special instruction, all in Margaret's hand. All dated and postmarked years before Rick Jameson ever served his first slice. "Here you go." The clerk passed over the plastic sleeve and copies. "Anything else you need?" "No, ma'am," I said. "This is plenty." Harold drove us back, probably figuring my hands were too unsteady. As we passed Rick's place, the lunch line was already curling around the block. All those people, not knowing they were eating stolen glory. I had him parked 2 streets over, out of sight of the diner's windows. My phone buzzed. Sarah from the Gazette. "Tip me when you're ready." The engine ticked as it cooled, and I sat there staring at Rick's door through the gaps between buildings. The red awning, the smug sign about world-famous pie, the steady stream of customers. "What time's he busiest?" Harold asked. 2 o'clock, I said, checking my watch. "Tourist rush hits right after lunch, crowd fades. Gets all his regulars plus the bus tours." Harold nodded slowly. "Lots of witnesses that way. That's what I'm counting on." I tucked the sleeve with Margaret's recipe into her cookbook and checked the time again. 2 hours until the truth would walk through that door. You know that calm that settles over you when a plan comes together? That's how I felt sitting at my kitchen table that afternoon, arranging everything just so. The original envelope still in its protective sleeve. 3 certified copies, each one clear as crystal. Margaret's cookbook, opened to the matching recipe page. Even grabbed her old reading glasses case, seemed fitting somehow. "Keep it simple," Harold had said over lunch. "No accusations, no anger, just the facts." He was right, of course. I drafted my statement on a note card, keeping it clean and direct, dates, documentation, and Margaret's name. Crossed out anything that felt like scoring points. This wasn't about revenge. It was about setting things straight. "You want me there early?" Harold asked when he called to confirm the reporter was coming. "No," I told him. "Better if it's just me at first. Don't want it looking like an ambush." I spent a good hour practicing what I'd say, making sure my voice stayed steady. Even recorded myself on my phone, playing it back to check the tone. Had to sound more sad than angry, more disappointed than bitter. Around 3 o'clock, I texted Tommy, "Meet me at Rick's after practice, corner table. Bring your steady heart. It's time to show what's true." He sent back a thumbs-up emoji. That boy's got steel in him, just like his grandmother. I arrived at the diner 40 minutes early, parking where I could see both entrances. Sarah from the Gazette was already there, pretending to read at an outside table. Smart woman, she tucked her reporter's notebook inside one of those canvas shopping totes. Looked just like any other customer taking a late lunch break. The place was filling up fast. Tourist buses had dropped their loads, and the regulars were trickling in for early dinner. I walked in, nodding to folks I knew, and asked for water at the counter. "Table for one?" the hostess asked. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice low, "I was hoping to make a brief statement after dessert. Just a community clarification. 30 seconds, tops." She gave me that look young people give when they're not sure what to do with an old man's request. "You'd have to ask Mr. Jameson about that." "I will," I said, settling into a corner spot where I could watch the room fill up. Sarah caught my eye through the window and raised her coffee cup slightly. I gave her the tiniest nod back. She'd come in when the time was right. The smell of baking pies filled the air, Margaret's recipe working its magic, even in the wrong hands. My heart squeezed a bit, but I kept my face neutral. Watched Rick working the room, all handshakes and practice charm. He hadn't noticed me yet. Tommy slipped in around 5:30, still in his practice clothes, and joined me at the table. "You got it?" he whispered. I patted my jacket pocket where the envelope sat. "Sure do, son." Sarah chose that moment to come in, settling at a table near the counter with her tote bag in easy reach. Right on cue. The dinner rush was hitting its peak when I caught the hostess's eye and nodded. She disappeared into the kitchen, and a moment later Rick emerged, wiping his hands on a shoulder towel. I stood up slowly, Margaret's envelope held carefully in both hands. The room seemed to quiet just a bit, like it knew something was coming. Rick's smile was automatic when he saw me. then froze halfway when he spotted what I was holding. "This is Margaret's handwriting," I said, loud enough to carry, but not shout. My voice came out clear and steady, just like I'd practiced. I saw Sarah's phone come up, ready to record whatever happened next. Rick's eyes darted between my face, the envelope, and the crowd, starting to turn our way. The smile tried to restart itself, but couldn't quite make it. "Let me show you something interesting," I said, laying the envelope on the counter with the kind of care you'd use handling old photographs. The yellowed paper caught the overhead lights, making the postmark clear as day. This envelope was mailed by Margaret McKenna, that's my late wife, on June 12, 1998. The address here is our home, where we lived for 42 years. The diner had gone church quiet. Even the kitchen sounds seemed muffled, like the whole place was holding its breath. I unfolded the paper inside, Margaret's precise handwriting filling the page with measurements and notes. "This is her recipe for pie crust, complete with the lattice design." I held it up next to the display case, where Rick's pies sat with their telltale crosshatch pattern. "Notice anything familiar?" Rick's shoulders went rigid. His practiced smile had vanished completely now, replaced by something tighter, more calculating. The reporter, Sarah from the Gazette, stepped forward, phone recording. "Mr. Jameson, could you comment on where this recipe originated? Did Mrs. McKenna give you permission to use it commercially?" I kept my voice steady, the way I'd practiced. "There was never any license granted. No transfer of rights, no permission, given, written or verbal." I turned to face the room, making sure to catch every eye. "If anyone here has ever seen my wife sign such a document or heard her give that permission, I invite you to speak up now." The silence that followed was heavy as cemetery dirt. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. The AC hummed, but not a single voice rose to back Rick's claim. Rick's eyes darted to his office door, like maybe salvation was hiding in there. "I have paperwork," he muttered, but didn't move toward it. Too many phones were up now, recording his every twitch. The story was already spreading beyond his control. I'd promised Harold I wouldn't gloat, wouldn't let anger drive this moment. "A civil filing will be submitted tomorrow morning," I said, keeping my tone matter of fact. "But I'm not here to create a scene. I'm here because the truth matters. My wife's legacy matters." I stepped back from the counter, leaving the envelope where everyone could see it. The postmark faced up like an accusation. "Thank you all for listening," I said to the room. That's all I needed to say. Sarah wasn't done, though. She turned back to Rick, who'd gone the color of old wax paper. "Mr. Jameson, will you suspend selling the pie until this is resolved?" The question hung there like smoke after a lightning strike. Every eye in the place fixed on Rick, waiting for his answer. Even the kitchen staff had edged out to watch, still wearing their aprons. I could have jumped in, could have pressed him harder, but sometimes silence does the work better than words. So I just stood there, feeling Tommy's presence solid beside me, and let Rick squirm under the weight of all those stares. You know that moment when a room shifts? When power flows from one person to another, like water finding a new channel? That's what I felt happening. Every second Rick stood there without an answer. More truth seeped into the air. The phones kept recording. The question kept hanging. And Rick's empire, built on borrowed glory, started crumbling right there in front of the pie case that had made him famous. I thought about Margaret then, about how she'd handled this moment. She always said dignity beats dramatics. So I kept my face neutral, my hands steady, and let the evidence speak for itself. Sometimes justice doesn't need help. It just needs witnesses. First thing next morning, I met with Jim Hadley, our family attorney since before Margaret passed. He'd already prepared the paperwork, laying it all out neat as surgical tools on his mahogany desk. You ever notice how legal documents have their own smell, like fresh ink mixed with authority? "Everything's in order, Walt," Jim said, adjusting his reading glasses. "The certified copies, the chain of custody documentation from the post office, even photos of the current menu showing unauthorized use. We're not leaving any gaps." I signed where he pointed, my signature strong and clear. Funny how your hand stays steady when you know you're doing right. "What happens next?" I asked. "We file for immediate injunctive relief. That means asking the court to stop him from using the recipe while we sort this out." Jim gathered the papers, tapping them into alignment. "Given the evidence, I'd say our chances are good." Outside his office, my phone buzzed with interview requests, Local TV, radio shows, even a food blog wanted comments. I declined them all. Margaret always said dignity doesn't need a microphone. Instead, I watched Sarah's article hit the morning edition, "Envelope raises questions about Jameson pie," spread across the local section. The story laid out the facts clean and simple. The postmarked envelope, Margaret's documented recipe, the matching lattice design, and Rick's failure to produce any proof of permission. No accusations, just evidence. Over the next few days, I noticed changes around town. The lunch line at Rick's place got shorter. People who used to rave about Jameson's famous pie now gave each other knowing looks. Even the morning coffee crowd at Harold's garage started calling it Margaret's recipe again. Rick tried fighting back with a long social media post about baseless claims and jealous competitors. But someone in the comments linked side-by-side photos of Margaret's lattice diagram and his pie. The post disappeared within hours. A week later, Jim called with news that brought everything full circle. "The judge granted our preliminary injunction," he said. "Effective? Immediately. He has to stop serving the pie until this is resolved." I waited until evening to walk past the restaurant. The place was empty except for 2 tables, the overhead lights making the floor shine like black ice. Through the window, I could see the pie case already cleared out. The sight didn't bring any satisfaction, not really. Just a quiet sense that things were settling back into truth. At home, I set Margaret's cookbook on the kitchen table, running my fingers over the worn cover. The community market had been asking about local vendors lately. Maybe it was time to open a small cafe corner, nothing fancy, just pies made right, made honest. I found a calendar and circled a date 3 weeks out. Enough time to get permits, arrange a counter space, dig out Margaret's old display stands from the basement. The market manager had already offered to help with setup. Standing there in my quiet kitchen, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not victory, that wasn't what this was about. More like the relief you feel when a storm passes and the air clears. I reached for the light switch, and just before turning it off, caught a glimpse of Margaret's recipe book in the fading light. Her handwriting seemed to glow a little, like it was saying, "That'll do." You know what the funny thing was? Through this whole mess, I never once heard anyone say Rick's version tasted better than Margaret's original. Some things just can't be copied, I suppose. The love has to be real. 2 Saturdays after the injunction hit, I stood behind a polished wooden counter at the community market, watching early morning light catch the glass protecting Margaret's cookbook on the wall. The display looked just right. Simple, dignified, like something she would have approved of. You know how some moments feel like they're holding their breath? This was one of those. "Pass me that cooling rack, would you, Tommy?" I asked my grandson. We'd been up since 5, working side by side in the market's certified kitchen. His hands were steady as he'd helped crimp edges and weave lattices, getting every detail exactly as Margaret had drawn it. Harold wandered over, arms full of napkin boxes. "These go under the counter?" he asked, already knowing the answer. That was Harold's way, helping without making a fuss about it. The market was filling up now, regulars doing their Saturday shopping. A few paused to read our modest placard, "Margaret's pie, served by her family." Some nodded, like they were welcoming back an old friend. "First batch is ready, Grandpa," Tommy called from the kitchen. His voice had that mix of excitement and nerves that reminded me of Margaret before church bake sales. I'd seen the closed for renovation sign go up at Rick's place yesterday. The lawsuit had stripped him of any rights to the recipe, but it was Sarah's follow-up piece that really sealed things. She'd interviewed old-timers who remembered Margaret's pies from decades back, included photos of her winning ribbons at county fairs. The story painted such a clear picture of theft that Rick's reputation collapsed faster than a bad meringue. "Got our first customer," Harold murmured, nodding toward a grey-haired woman studying our menu board. Tommy straightened his apron, Margaret's old one, rolled twice at the waist to fit him. "Can I take her order, Grandpa?" "Go ahead, son." I watched him step up to the counter, shoulders back just like we'd practiced. The woman smiled, glancing between the cookbook above us and Tommy's earnest face. "1 slice of Margaret's pie, please," she said. "Been missing it something fierce." My grandson's elbow brushed my side as he reached for a plate. His movements were careful, respectful, serving more than just dessert. The woman took her first bite and closed her eyes. "Just like I remember," she whispered. The ache that had lived in my chest these past weeks shifted then, making room for something warmer. Pride, maybe. Not the showy kind Rick had plastered all over town, but the quiet sort that comes from doing things right. More customers drifted over. Harold kept the coffee flowing while Tommy handled the register like he'd been born to it. The air filled with cinnamon and butter, the same scents that used to wake me on Sunday mornings when Margaret was trying out new variations. I wiped down the counter between customers, each swipe bringing up a soft shine. Above me, Margaret's photo watched over it all, her smile knowing and gentle, the same smile she'd worn when she told me to guard these recipes, to remember they were our family's soul. The morning rush settled into a steady rhythm. Tommy was explaining the lattice pattern to a young mother, while her little girl pressed her nose against the display case. Harold topped off coffee cups, trading easy words with regulars. And me, I stood there feeling the pieces of a rebuilt life settling around us, warm and solid as a kitchen after winter. Looking up at Margaret's picture, I remembered what had kept me going through the whole mess. The words came easy now, not bitter anymore, but full of quiet certainty. A man's honor is his family's legacy.